In 2010, WWE ran their first season of NXT. NXT at this point was a much different show than what we know it as today. This was a time where NXT was an elimination game show. 8 hopefuls would be paired up with a WWE pro, and that pro would coach them through challenges and help determine the fate of the other competitors. In amongst these hopefuls was Daniel Bryan. Bryan was well respected on the indie scene and a fan favorite. The hardcores knew who this guy was. They knew about his amazing in-ring ability and they were pulling for the guy to win it all. Unfortunately, he'd be eliminated, and for a lot of people, their hopes of seeing the American Dragon in WWE were dashed. When WWE ran their Nexus angle, Bryan was brought back, but he was legitimately fired after strangling Justin Roberts with a tie. We all thought this was it for him. He had squandered 2 chances at the WWE, and he wouldn't be back, or if he was, it would be a long road back. Thankfully for him, WWE saw the error in their ways and brought him back. From here, he'd climb the ranks. First, he'd win the United States title, beating his former NXT pro, The Miz. Then he'd achieve success in different aspects of WWE, everything from Money in the Bank and even an 18-second loss. But what was the time that defined this indie darling? In 2011, Daniel Bryan won the Money in the Bank briefcase. This came at the legendary Money in the Bank 2011 pay-per-view, and it looked like everything was set. WWE had their money on Bryan and he was their guy. But as loved as he was, he lacked one thing critical to every WWE superstar: a character. Sure, he would make out with the divas, but was that enough? Bryan, when he won the Money in the Bank, said he'd cash in at WrestleMania the following year. But he'd instead end up cashing it in at TLC that year, and now Daniel Bryan was the WWE World Heavyweight Champion. He'd have some successful title defenses, but when Royal Rumble winner Sheamus decided to choose him as his WrestleMania opponent, it was a kiss and 18 seconds that would finish off his first title run. From there, he found himself in a love story with Punk and AJ, and then later on, the formation of Team Hell No. Kane and Daniel Bryan, 2 polar opposites. These guys just couldn't get along, and it was everything sports entertainment should be. The 2 would attend anger management and consistently bickered, but slowly, they started to appreciate one another and found themselves as tag team champions. The Shield would put an end to that title reign, but man, were these guys ever entertaining. They were organically loved by the WWE universe. Everything they did, their comedic flair, their somehow brilliant chemistry, it was all amazing. When these 2 lost the titles, Bryan went out of his way to prove that he wasn't the weak link of the group. He delivered a more vicious side to his character. It was at this time where people fell in love with Daniel Bryan even more. His organic connection to the WWE fans was unrivaled. His in-ring skills, much the same. He was universally loved. It's this admiration which led John Cena to choose Daniel Bryan as his SummerSlam opponent. The story here was the top dog in the company against the underdog. It was that simple. Was Bryan ready to be WWE champion? Well, the McMahons didn't really think so. They started to poke fun at his appearance and stature, saying that he would always come up short. This was because of his height and how he wasn't a prototypical wrestling star. They simply said Bryan was a B+ player, and a face like his would never be the face of WWE. They tried to get him to cut his hair and shave his beard, but it wouldn't go anywhere. This only helped get fans more behind him. The whole aesthetic of Daniel Bryan just worked so well. He was a guy like me and you. He fought for his dreams and he didn't take no for an option. Now it was SummerSlam time. In the main event of the show was the ultimate underdog against WWE's top dog, Daniel Bryan and John Cena. The special guest referee though was Triple H. After an amazing back and forth match, so many close falls, the underdog finally toppled the face of the company, and now he was the face of the company. Until pedigree, cash in, that's all she wrote. In the same night Daniel Bryan had become the WWE champion, it was all taken away from him. Triple H turned his back on him, and now the face of WWE was Randy Orton. The Authority had it out for Daniel Bryan. He just didn't fit the mold. He couldn't carry the company. So Triple H, Vince McMahon, and Stephanie would do everything in their power to keep him away from the WWE Championship. They'd attack Daniel Bryan mercilessly, and he just couldn't do anything about it. The rules were, if anyone disobeyed Triple H, there would be repercussions. Now it was time for Night of Champions. Bryan had earned himself another chance at the WWE Championship, and he earned himself another win. But he was stripped of the title after a fast count. The Authority thought that Bryan was working with referee Scott Armstrong, so they fired him for violating policy. Now the title was vacated, and it would be another match between Orton and Bryan, this time inside Hell in a Cell. And to prevent from any referee shenanigans, Shawn Michaels would be the special guest referee. This was the only one Triple H could trust, was his best friend. He knew he would do what was best for business. During the match, Michaels got heated after Bryan attacked Triple H, and you don't mess with Michaels' boy, so sweet chin music, and Randy Orton was the WWE champion once again. From here, Bryan left the WWE title scene. Fans were enjoying his me versus the establishment story. They put it on the back burner though. He'd feud with the Wyatt family, where Bray Wyatt tried to brainwash him into joining the Wyatt family. And Bryan had had enough. He was tired of everyone screwing him over. He was tired of fighting everyone and coming up short. He knew whatever he did, he just wouldn't win. So he joined the Wyatt family. He was now a follower of Bray Wyatt's group. But it didn't last very long. After a steel cage match, Wyatt was about to sacrifice Bryan. He was the reason they lost. In Wyatt's eyes, it was all Bryan's fault, so he had to pay the price. It was this moment where Daniel Bryan said, "Screw following the buzzards, y'all are gonna follow me." He beat down the Wyatts and led one of the greatest yes chants in the history of history. This visual was simply stunning. From here, it was Bryan versus Wyatt at the upcoming Royal Rumble. And when I say this match was amazing, this match was amazing, but Bryan fell short once again. And later in the night, it was time for the Royal Rumble match, where we wouldn't see Bryan. That's all the crowd wanted, was Daniel Bryan. The kids wanted him out in the ring, the moms wanted him out in the ring, dogs wanted him out in the ring. He was all WWE fans wanted to see, was the underdog. After he wasn't in the Royal Rumble, fans would continue to make their voice heard. They booed Batista out of the building when he won the 2014 Royal Rumble, all for the simple fact they wanted Daniel Bryan. But it was literal. The Authority wanted a dude like this nowhere near the main event. But one week, they said they'd entertain Bryan being the face of WWE. All he had to do was beat WWE World Champion Randy Orton, but of course, it would all be for naught. Thankfully, Bryan qualified for the Elimination Chamber, where he'd have another shot at the title, but he was attacked by Kane, and it was another opportunity where Bryan would be screwed over. The same guy he won Tag Team Gold with a few years ago was the guy screwing him out of his dream. It was from here, Bryan had to take matters into his own hands. He had to fight for the people. Dare I say, he was the voice of the voiceless. WWE fans were rejecting Batista and Randy Orton as the main event match at WrestleMania. Because their man was Daniel Bryan, his popularity was at a fever pitch. So Bryan confronted the Authority. He said clearly the Authority had it in for him. Now all he wanted was Triple H at WrestleMania. He had screwed him over for nearly a year, and he needed to take out what was causing all of this. On the March 3rd, 2014 episode of Raw, Daniel Bryan stood in the middle of the ring and told the Chicago crowd they had a voice and they would hijack Raw. Daniel Bryan would not leave the ring until one of two things happened. Either Triple H accepted his challenge or Batista came out to fight him. Triple H came out and the answer was still no. But when Daniel Bryan fought Batista in the main event, he'd hold his own against everyone until the Authority would once again get the better of him. The next week, as long as Daniel Bryan apologized to the Authority, he wouldn't be fired for his actions. But Daniel Bryan would not quit. He would not give in. He would simply occupy Raw. Daniel Bryan and hundreds of his fans dressed in his shirts would fill the ring. They would hold the show hostage until they got what they wanted. Triple H versus Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania 30. This was just a wild sight. That's all I can say. Daniel Bryan, no matter what anyone said, just wouldn't leave the ring. He had hijacked the show, and despite their best efforts, they couldn't clear the ring, so they had to give in. And the result was, it was Daniel Bryan versus Triple H at WrestleMania 30. If Bryan won, he would be added into the title match at WrestleMania 30. Everything between Triple H and Daniel Bryan was just so well executed. It was the highlight of the show and proved how amazing both men were at their jobs. Triple H would get Bryan handcuffed and just mercilessly beat him down. It did a great job at cementing Daniel Bryan as the underdog that you couldn't help but cheer for, and also Triple H as a horrible villain. The visuals going into WrestleMania were a different level. The segments were great. Now we were a few days away from WrestleMania 30. Daniel Bryan would end the Go Home Raw on top of the world. But the question was, would he end WrestleMania 30 on the top of the WWE mountain? It's the 30th anniversary of WrestleMania. Brock is fighting Taker, Cena's fighting Wyatt, The Rock, Stone Cold, and Hulk all appeared. But there was one question. Could Daniel Bryan do the unthinkable? Could he beat one of the greatest in the industry? And if he won that match, could he beat two more of the greatest in the industry? In the first match of the show, it was Daniel Bryan versus Triple H. Winner advances to the main event of the show. This match was back and forth with the crowd roaring and biting at every move. The tension was high and so were the stakes. And it would be a running knee that helped Daniel Bryan topple the game and advance to the main event of the show. The Yes movement was at a fever pitch. Everyone was going wild. Now it was the main event of the show, an injured Daniel Bryan versus two of the all-time greats, Randy Orton and Batista. Could Daniel Bryan reach the mountaintop? After months of mental anguish, torture, and being screwed at every turn, could he finally do it? Bryan fought his way valiantly. He would come so close before Triple H would pull the ref out of the ring, and out came Scott Armstrong. The same ref which was fired a few months back had returned, and now he was working for the Authority. But that wouldn't work. Then Randy and Batista would work together to eliminate the Pest, the guy that they just couldn't get rid of, and it looked like they had finally done that. It was a Batista bomb into an RKO on the announce table. Daniel Bryan was getting carted out of the arena and his hopes of winning the title were over. Then he gets off the stretcher and he lets go one final flurry as the crowd is roaring, knee to Batista, yes lock, and the culmination of everything had come true. Daniel Bryan was the WWE World Heavyweight Champion. He had jumped through every hurdle, everything thrown in his way was overcame, everyone who was a thorn in his side, he beat in this match. The crowd was going wild. WrestleMania simply turned into Yesomania, and the Yes movement was complete. This feud solidified Daniel Bryan as a top tier star. There was an organic magic that he encapsulated, and what that is, it's still kinda hard to figure out. Daniel Bryan's run to the WWE's mountaintop was simply magical. Even though he got injured, it was well done. It was long-term storytelling. Whether it was intentional or not, who knows? But this is one of the best underdog stories ever told, and everything blended together so well. Everything from him losing in 18 seconds to the screw job, and him overcoming everyone in his path. When people talk about the Yes movement, it's in two different lights. Some people say that Daniel Bryan became a star during this time, and without this, it would have been harder for guys like AJ Styles to achieve success as quick as he did. People say that Bryan transcended the business for guys his size, and it became okay to look the way he did. Others will say it was a time that didn't do anyone any favors. People say this is where fans started to get their way a little bit too much. That topic is up for conversation, and I'll leave that up to you. As far as the Yes movement goes, it was just fun to watch the product. It was a storyline that got you hooked in, and it was simply magical.